How are you doing?
Sabih, good morning, everyone. Thanks for everyone's time. It is a very interesting time of year and a very interesting year. It seems that every 6 weeks the world reinvents itself, and I think it's a real it's a privilege to work in this space as we're trying to ultimately help students. And there's a lot of moving pieces to that. But the focus of our conversation today is going to be on how we retain and re-engage students for next semester. And I know that's kind of hard to get our heads around, but at the same time, spring is coming, and so we have some great work, and we have some great insight into how we can support your organizations as you prepare and engage with students, thinking even into next semester and the following year. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Let's try to keep this interactive. There's a Q&A and a chat, and we have some folks on our end that will facilitate those questions. Also, if anyone's interested in the recording, please don't hesitate to email us, let us know, and we can send out a copy of that. And then most importantly, we want this to be the beginning of a conversation, not the end or the capstone of it. So by all means, reach out and stay engaged with us. A little bit about the folks presenting today. My name is Andy Edwards. That's a much better looking picture of me before my COVID hair. Really appreciate everyone attending. And I'm joined by our founder and CEO, Sabih Bin Wasi. A little background on me is I've been working in the education technology space for several years, probably have met with a couple hundred institutions at this point. It's probably more than half of those since the beginning of COVID, it seems, with all of our how efficient we are with Zoom meetings in terms of the numbers we can have, and then had some great conversations. Sabih, I always say, almost needs no introduction, but he is the founder of Stellic. He built Stellic as a student when he was really struggling to stay engaged and understand how to get to the finish line as an engineering student at Carnegie Mellon University. I'll let Sabih speak a little bit about why he built Stellic and how it's particularly relevant today. Sabih?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, I'm happy to share that. Yeah, so basically, the problem we are trying to solve here is working with institutions, particularly my own institution when I went to college, is providing a system that really is catered for students primarily, and advisors and administrators at the same time. And just like building a system that's modern, that leverages the existing data on campus, and provides a holistic experience for these users. I mean, like, the problem we are trying to solve with Stellic is not giving them 15 different tabs to open, but just one browser tab that leverages the data in the background with all the existing systems. So that's what we are doing. And some of the examples of that, like, workflows is degree planning is part of it, advising is another one, like tracking of the progress. All of these things are part of that one solution that we have built. And so we work with institutions across the country, institutions who are looking to improve their engagement with students, and figuring out ways to retain them in an environment that seems more modern, that seems more connected and integrated to all of them, and providing all that data back to the leadership of the university so they are not in the dark. So it really is like, how I see this is like a two sides of the same coin. Administrative tasks become easier when students are more empowered. So that's kind of the problem that we are trying to solve with this.
Sabih, in the context of the now, as they say, right, of today, what do you see, in particular to sort of the challenges that we're facing around COVID, and sort of the students, the uncertainty they have, whether when they can return to campus, if they are on campus in a hybrid mode, whether it be the classes they can or cannot take, the path to graduation, and then even, let's be honest, changing pathways. There's gonna be different careers. That's the reason we're going to school, is to obviously for an education, but also to be set to compete in today's economy. And there's gonna be changes to those paths. So I'd love to get your perspective, really, and we've been talking to a lot of schools. I've been talking to them, you've been talking to them, around sort of how methodologically we can go back and deliberately go about and understand how to address these students' needs. And then I think it'd be great to talk through a few of the most common scenarios that you've heard from our partners. And then hopefully we can open this up for Q&A at the end, and address some specific questions.
Yeah, I think this is very, very relevant conversation as as we talked about before, this conversation or this topic really came about in our conversations, especially with our team with institutional success, where as they talk to these universities, and then you realize that the challenges are like whole different thing. I mean, every day things are changing, and retention and engagement has become a whole different topic, right? So very, very timely conversation. And I think, as I was telling you earlier, this is the kind of conversation that should not be dependent on a platform or on a particular institution. There is a lot that can be learned across it. So it feels like I'm excited to share that with everyone on the call today.
Yeah, no, I mean, so a couple of the things that I've seen, and across the landscape is, there's really three underlying challenges here. I think that's or three buckets. There's lots of challenges within each of these buckets, and then we'll hit a bunch of them. But that's keeping students on track, obviously keeping them healthy too, but keeping them on track. Collaborations between students and advisors, and then the resource question. So in terms of keeping students on track, we sort of have unprecedented, upheaval to what we can offer, when we can offer, and how we can offer it. I think the student advisor collaboration has never been more important. And this is sort of a double whammy, for lack of a better word, in that we have students that they not only can they not physically meet with advisors, and we're limited by what we can do with Zoom and whatnot, but the challenges are harder. And so we need to use these new resources in different ways and use them more effectively. And then finally, we need to figure out what we need to offer students and when we need to offer them so they can complete on time. So these are the three things I think that come up most often in my conversation. I know in a lot of the conversations you've had as well.
Yeah, and they are all like very, very connected to retention and engagement, like directly connected to them. So yeah, very timely topics.
So, I think you mentioned earlier that you see that regardless of how we do this, what technologies we use, what approaches, there's sort of a methodology, right? We should, this is what we sort of learned from some of our partners, is that they need to first identify students. They then need to engage with them and communicate with them. They need to collaborate. And then finally, they need to empower those students. Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit to that methodology and how you see it being relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think so this is kind of something that we have seen pattern across the board. Like anytime we want to have engagement with students or we want to retain them, like we have figured out like it really is a 4-step process, right? So and so this is like, and this is we are working with like some of these like research R1 private universities, and we are working with community colleges, and this kind of stays across the board to be true. And so the way we think about that is you first want to identify the students. To your point, you have very limited resources. So you can't do everything for everyone. You have to figure out the population where you want to interact with them or engage with them just because you think they might be more at risk. Once you identify them, then you communicate with them and make them feel heard. This is not like two separate departments. The students are thinking in their own mindset, and the administrators and advisors are living in their own decisions. There needs to be a communication channel around that. Once you communicate with them, this becomes actually very important. You're not just communicating saying we are there for you. Your communication needs to have an action, right? It has to have a call to action, so students feel like I can act. I don't have to. I'm not just like listening board here. I can act on the information that I have been provided. So the call to action is very important, I think, in student engagement. And then you want to empower them to make their decision. I think this is something that is very close to our mission, that you want to share the ownership with students. Like you don't want to spoon feed them. You want to have some kind of supervision around that. You want to make sure they are staying on track, but you want to empower them so they feel like it's their journey, it's their pathway, it's their outcomes. It's not being imposed to them by anyone, and they feel like disengaged and just involved in these processes. So that becomes empower as the third piece. Now that you have empowered them, you want to make sure you are tracking if they are able to do those things or not, and this cycle kind of continues, right? So you identify the students, talk to them, give them a call to action, give them an opportunity to take ownership of that, track who has done it, and then the leftover goes back into that cycle, right? You just keep doing this kind of a loop there. And we have seen this across the board, this turning out to be like giving like 20-30% increase in student engagement, right? Just by doing that piece by itself. So this is something relevant. And as I mentioned earlier, like none of this is, Stellic specific or a certain school specific. It's more of a methodology and an approach towards like student engagement and retention, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds great in the abstract, but let's get to the problems. I mean, because these problems, I think one of the key things, and Sabih, you and I talk about this all the time, and it comes up, is that none of these problems are terribly new, but it's like they've been accelerated 3 years, right. Or it's the problems have grown muscles and are on steroids. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the ones that comes, I think, top of mind, because even in the best of years, in spring semester, we have students that aren't graduating because they couldn't get into the last requirement, the last course they needed to complete a degree. This happens under like the most pristine circumstances, and we obviously are living and breathing in less than pristine circumstances. And so curious in terms of how you can apply this 4-step approach to be able to accurately predict and intervene and prevent sort of these 3 students that aren't graduating because their final requirement was not completed.
Yeah, we just saw that, like I say, last week, where one of our institutional partner just suddenly had to go online, right? And like when I say online, not just like something, but everything. All the students were online.
And this was because of a COVID outbreak, correct?
Yes, of course, yeah. And with that, like sudden change, like the challenge we started seeing was all around, especially around like courses that just cannot be done in an online setting. So lab courses and those pieces around that. And so they had to figure out a way to, okay, now how do we retain them? How do we engage them in the process where we have just suddenly disrupted the plans or the pathways that they had there? So same, and again, as I mentioned earlier, same 4-step process applies. You pick, you identify the students who would be affected by certain courses not being offered or like getting disrupted. Then you communicate that with them, empower them to then build an alternate path that will still help them, stay on track, and the outcome will still stay the same. And you track it and you make sure that students are actually okay with that bottleneck course not being offered. So the same exact process that we just talked about absolutely applies to bottleneck courses.
Yeah, I mean, great to see what that looks like in the context of Stellic.
Yeah, I mean, we can use Stellic. Again, I want to highlight this is not like Stellic specific, but this is the easiest way for us to show some of these pieces. Let me actually log in and show something here. So if so this is one of our like main views, and I want to start with this because this is where you identify the students. So you can see here all the students that, and you can imagine this view from a perspective of an associate dean, this view from a perspective of an advisor, from a registrar office, all these different places who do care about enrollment and class schedules and things like that. So when you come on this way, looking at all your students, what the first thing you want to do is you want to identify the students who will get affected, as I mentioned earlier. So what Stellic does is it pulls in all the SIS information, like your demographics about are you a senior, are you a junior? So you can pick all these different SIS fields, and because it has a built-in ways to track the progress of a student through a degree audit, it allows institutions to then identify students who are not just seniors, but they have that particular course remaining. So I think one course I was thinking about is this experiments course in this particular institute. So if we pick this course here, so I can now see that there are 18 students who are in this particular bracket, right? They are seniors and they still have that particular course remaining. And so now what we need to do is we can now go on their plan and see what is going on. So the first thing is identifying the student. We have already identified the 18 students who will get impacted. You can communicate with them without even seeing their profile. So I can you can either use email or a built-in communication channel. And then, as I mentioned earlier, call to action is important. It's not just like we have heard this. So I can say something along the lines of lab course move to spring, right? And then I can tell them don't worry, we are moving this course to spring. You will still be able to graduate on time. There's no need to panic in that sense. And then I can send them a message, or even better, send them a text message around that. So the communication box gets ticked off when we do that and engage with them about our thought process around that. So that's the communicate piece. And the third then becomes like you want to empower them. So again, Stellic allows you to plan your pathways all the way to your outcome. So if I pick a particular student here, let me see, let's say this particular student.
And Sabih, I think what's interesting here is that we just emailed all 18 of the students, but we can then engage on a one-on-one. So this is not just about mass communication. This is both providing some scale by being able to communicate with people quickly at scale, but then individually being able to engage too. So this is not choosing between mass and individuation. It's doing both. It's bringing both together.
I think, yeah. So what we have seen, or what we recommend institutions is more like a 60-40 model. 60% of the things you want to do in a mass way, so everyone gets impacted who is there, and then the 40% for the most at-risk population or who would require that individualized attention, then you go to the student profile and you engage with them. You either send them a message or you understand their plan, and then you work through that, right? So it just depends on like where you are in that in the at-risk levels of that. So yeah, so because we have the plan here, I was talking about the empower piece, and this is where it becomes so irrelevant, right? So I can now see that the student is planning to take a course in fall, which is now not offered because they have gone remote. So you can then move that course into a different semester, and you have empowering them for them to visualize whether the course can be moved or not. And you can see it says like not likely to be offered just because it hasn't been offered historically. And the student now, because we have communicated with them that we will offer this course in spring, they are empowered to be, to visualize that and be okay with that. So that becomes like the empower piece. And again, you can't just trust students entirely. You want to give ownership, and that's where tracking comes in. So we have ways, I mean, Stellic is one example, but I guess SIS can also give you some of these reports. You can say, I want to see students who have not planned for ME 18, even in the next semester, right? So once you save that as a report, I mean, in the examples of Stellic, ME 18 remaining, like you can track those changes. And so you get notified, immediately as soon as student has planned for it. And now you are like, okay, that's great. Now people have, so that piece is very important. Like typically what we see things falling apart is you do that, you just tell them that this is going to happen, but you're not really monitoring it. So the tracking becomes really relevant in that regard. Yeah.
And when we say tracking in the context of Stellic, we can both track in terms of what they've done, but what they're planning to do. So I think that's what's unique here. And I'm curious in terms of some of the experience at our partner institutions, what you've seen in terms of the level of engagement that students are willing to do this proactively. Are there carrots or sticks used to incentivize this, or how are students behaving in terms of planning and giving you insight into what their future needs are?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the empower piece, right? When you have truly empowered, I think this is one of the myths in higher ed, where like if we give them systems that addresses students' needs, they will not be engaged, they will not adopt to it. The truth is like they really want it. I mean, we have done multiple surveys and research, and we have seen like people absolutely want it. And so for us, like our biggest communication channel is word of mouth. You don't have to force students or put registration holds for them to plan out their pathways and engage like what they want to do in their career. You just give them a platform which speaks their language. We have, for Stellic, we are seeing like 90%, 80% adoption in the very first semester, and students saying that, yeah, this is what we want to do. So I don't think empower piece is hard. It's just like understanding those needs very well and speaking that language. I think like when you cannot give them, what do you call it, like a database driven table, an Excel sheet, and say fill it out, when on the other tab they have Facebook open, right? And on their phone they have Instagram open. These things kind of need to speak together. So in my opinion, empowering is not hard as long as the tools speak the language that students are used to.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. All right, I want to challenge you a little bit here. We covered a requirement, a lab requirement that was a degree requirement for this given major. What about sort of as all these pieces are moving and they're shuffling and now taking a lab in the spring and they can't take another elective now and things like that? How do we plan for these other courses and the needs of these students in the context of not just absolute requirements, but what the knock-on effects are, and the sort of the second and third degree effects of all this sort of scheduling chaos?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So it's not just like core courses, it's any requirement, like, the broad electives and gen eds and all that stuff. So you can, yeah, you should be doing and tracking all of that also, even if they are flexible. So you can, instead of picking a course here, I can go here and say, show me students who have any, like, more than 5 requirements remaining and they're already seniors. So you can be completely broad and like look for all kind of requirements, not just courses, specific courses, and get that list, in that way. Actually, Andy, I will show one very interesting thing on that. There is a whole view we have designed for it. So like we were looking at like mechanical engineering programs. I'm going to search for that. And we look for the class of 2021, right? That's the class which will graduate next spring. I have this like a way that I can track all of my students across all of those requirements, and that's what you were hinting at. It's not just
Yeah.
based on a particular core course, but it's also based on what about their concentration electives. How many students have that remaining, for it to be completed. And by the way, the cycle continues, same idea, right? So you identify the students who have like a particular elective remaining. You want to identify who those students are within the system. You want to message them and you want to empower them to plan for it and track it. The same cycle continues regardless whether we're talking about courses or anything in that regard.
No, that's helpful. Well, the next scenario I think is a little more challenging, and we were sort of just trying to complete the last piece of the puzzle with these students in terms of retaining them and keeping them engaged. But what about the bigger challenge when students are uncertain whether they should even be coming back to school after sort of whatever they've experienced this semester? How can we sort of not scare them, but lay out the reality of what the implications of taking time off would be, and both just objectively? I mean, I think we have to be honest partners with our students. These are unprecedented times, but how can we sort of show them and illustrate sort of what that looks like, the implications of taking a gap semester or leave?
Yeah, I think like with so many decisions happening at like a light speed right now, like students are very unsure of like, should I go, should I not go, should I transfer, should I not transfer? Like there's all kind of questions there. My concern and worry is those that anxiety is not translated into like visualizing what that means, right? So we can absolutely apply the exact same 4-step process. You want to identify students. So one way we can do that, in again, I'm using Stellic as an example, but SISs might be able to give the same information, is to say, I want to see students who are, like who have not registered for any course, right? So I want to see any student who have like 0 courses registered in the current semester we're talking about, right? Fall 2020. So you immediately see that there are 66 students who have not registered for any course in the current semester. And because the data needs to be synced with SIS, we also know, like, if they have, and they are not on, what do you call it, like, on personal leave, or they are not on, like, leave of absence or any kind of withdrawal. So how come these people have still not registered for any classes, right? So you want to, first of all, you want to identify them. And then the communication piece becomes very interesting here. So of course you can do the method I was saying earlier, which is you email them and say, hey, what's happening? Like, you have not yet registered. But there is another way where I think we can do a more of a mass communication, to your earlier point. And that way is providing them a pathway that doesn't make them feel like that they have to just drop out if they can't take next semester, which is what I think, by the way, parents are very concerned that if they take a gap semester, they might just never go back to college. And so the idea there is that we have this, I mean, you can do it on paper too, but with templates is basically giving them this guided pathway that for all these computer science students or mechanical engineering students, here's a pathway you can follow if you cannot come in fall semester, right? So you still give them a plan that they can follow, and then the students, so that becomes more of a structured communication with the students. They get notified that, oh, somebody else is thinking about it. Then we go back to the empower stage. Students can then use that guided pathway directly into their plan and say, yeah, if I take a semester off, I'm not like, going to completely vanish. I can move everything around to still be able to graduate on time. I'm a sophomore. I mean, I think one example I think I had prepared for this conversation was I think this it was a sophomore, this student. So I'm logged in as a student right now to show you that side. And then I can basically say, okay, here is my pathway. And I just like drag and drop. And I know I have 2 more semesters to cover up for me not being able to attend fall. And just by allowing them to drag and drop those courses into like into a way that shows that they can plan things for future, you are making it easy for them to visualize that piece very nicely. So exactly, so that's the point there. Like you want to communicate to show them an alternate path so they don't feel like I have no idea what will happen if I take a semester off, right? And then same thing goes back to the piece where like show me all the students who have built out an alternate path. Like you want to monitor that. Show me students who have built out an alternate path that will still help them graduate on time. So you keep tracking that and you see, okay, there are 17 students who have made that change, and now you can identify the others who did not and reach out to them. So the cycle kind of continues in that regard.
And the important piece there is that you can be very prescriptive, and it's not just sending a mass email that says, please come back and register. And, I've heard stories from a lot of the conversations where, the entire sort of undergraduate dean's office is on the phone calling people to see what's up, how they're doing. And that's a great sort of superhero effort, but I don't know if we can do that for years to come. I think that there's certainly some process and scalability here that is different. I mean, and hats off for all those people that made those phone calls. I had a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I am like usually, honestly, usually we think of like, higher education to work like with its own discipline and own pace. I would say like in the summer, as a startup, we had to learn from higher education how to move fast. So yeah, I think like we have seen advising happening in a whole different level as before. It has messed up I think the work-life balance of administrators and advisors. But I think I've seen like some really good results by doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the heroics we've seen in terms of schedule changes and things like that, and obviously a lot of these the tools that you've gone through in the last 12, 14 minutes can speak to if you had to make a schedule change, if you had to close a campus, sort of the what if scenarios that we could do to ensure we can still provide the right resources. And I think that brings us sort of to our last scenario. And then we do have a couple questions I want to dive into from the audience. But the last scenario is understanding course demand and really resource demand. Like once we know what students might be doing in terms of staying, retaining, not coming, changing their plans, and even going back to changing their majors. Because I think we've been kind of thinking in the context that everyone wants to resume to March 2020. And the reality is that we're not going back to March 2020. People are going to want different degrees, different plans, and you're going to need to offer the correct courses to get them there. I have a feeling that there's going to be a few public health courses that are in high demand in the coming semesters, just a hunch. So love to see how we once again use these 4 steps to sort of do that. And from an administrative side, ensure we're providing the right resources back to students.
Yeah, I think to that, like my belief is that the institutions that will come strong on the other side of this conversation will be the ones that will cater to students, like that will basically keep students at the center of some of these decisions. I think like students will have more access to alternate choices right now. So it's important that like what we are offering is relevant to students. And so it's not just, I mean, I think traditionally what happens is like when you think of like what courses to offer, though there is a cyclic process. We look at the historical data and you say, okay, here's the restrictions by faculty of when can they, teach a particular course. And that kind of goes into the system and says, okay, here's the schedule for the next semester. And students figure out like wait listing and, all of the challenges there. That should change. And it directly connects to retention and engagement with students. There's especially with, like, you look at Coursera, right? Or you look at all these like online courses, you can see the distribution of courses because students have autonomy. They can take whatever they like to take. And you can see like how that delta is changing. So I think institutions that use the course offering or the content that is offered to students as one of the differentiating factors will play a very important role in engaging students and making them feel I'm not just going there to get a degree, I'm going there to learn this one skill or one topic that directly aligns, with what I want to do basically.
Yeah.
So one way, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see a little bit of sort of how we can sort of predict course demand based on these evolving needs, based on a bunch of students hopefully aspiring to be the next Dr. Fauci's.
Right.
That's my vision, or my hope at least. Uh,
So it goes back to the same idea where like if we have the intention of the student somehow captured, we can understand like where the boat is going. So same idea, you want to identify students or identify demand actually in an aggregated way for the courses. So you gave an example of like public health. One course we have seen. This is really a real world scenario. Like if you pick, I think it's called like well-being course, the science of well-being, right?
I think that's less about public health and more about people's sanity, but
Yeah. So
we'll run with that. And can I take this one? Can I audit this one?
we all should. By the way, this course is now also offered by Yale University, I think, on Coursera. So, and it's one of the most popular courses over the last 6 months. So this is a very interesting course, right? It has been offered over the last 4 or 5 years. You can see the people there were 2 students who took it in the spring. There were like, 8 students who took it last spring. Um, and then this just the whole thing changes, right? And now you start seeing like there are 34 students who want to take this course next semester. So you start like you again, like now you know what courses are like most in demand. If you don't have access to this information, it becomes really hard. So you're identifying what students want to take is again goes back to the step one process. You want to communicate with them. You want to tell them now that you know this course is more relevant, communicate with all the students saying, hey, we have noticed that there's a need for us to learn the skills of science of well-being. We are offering like multiple sections next semester for you to take this course, and here's a professor who would teach that course. What you have done is you have communicated with them and you have felt empowered. You are saying that yeah, whatever you are doing on this platform, or like whenever you are sharing your intention with us, it's not going in the black box. We are making decisions based on that. And then it goes back to the same idea of like you start tracking of how many students want to take that course and make sure your resources are well aligned in
Right,
terms
tell
of.
me about some of the other data that is here, because I think it's kind of interesting. Because yes, it seems like we need to offer a few more sections of this class, but beyond that, let's be careful when we offer them and how we offer them, right?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these things are very relevant for decision making. So you can see, for example, this course students typically take in their first year. Makes sense. Like you are more like thinking of all experimenting different pathways. Students typically take this course at the same time when they take these other courses. So this allows them to figure out like what are the right timings to offer that course. And what are the popular programs who are most interested. And this is actually again a very interesting example where you see the course is about science of well-being, but the most popular major is computer science. Who wants to take that? I mean, partly because this particular institution, computer science happens to be one of their largest programs. But it's interesting, right? It's not just about like someone who wants to take it from the bio perspective or humanities perspective. Like even like STEM degrees or computer science majors are also like, equally interested in taking a course like that. So there's a lot of interesting data points that you can look at in terms of deciding like when to offer, where to offer, how much to offer, whether to offer at all or not.
And taking, I think we've been wearing the dean or head of advising hat for the last 22 minutes or so. Putting on a faculty or department chair hat here, I think, is also kind of a different perspective. I know it might not be something that we're always thinking about as advisors addressing student needs, but these are sort of the institutional needs that a department chair that's trying to figure out how many adjuncts to hire or things like that might need as well, right?
Yeah, no, I think this is like, my favorite word, right? Like we follow a shared responsibility model. Like that's what it is. Like it's not like, okay, advisors will only have to do their job well, or students have to just do their job well, or a dean has to be, it has to be a collaborative process. So one thing that we strongly encourage, and most of our institutions actually follow that approach, is that you want to provide different accesses to the platform to all kinds of users. And you are right, like when a department head looks at this information, right, they will see a whole different decisions coming out of that. When an advisor sees that information, they see a very different view of it. When a provost sees it, they see a different view of it, right? So it is, you're absolutely right, like this data is relevant for all different kind of stakeholders in a very different way. And different decisions can come from those different perspectives.
Great. Sabih, we do have a couple questions, and then I also just want to take a pause for everyone to sort of, if there are additional questions, we have about, I think, 8 more minutes. So I will ask a few of the questions from the audience, and then we'll see if there are a few more. And then obviously we're glad to continue this conversation, you know, in a smaller format afterwards. But the first question is about attendance reporting and sort of folks missing multiple labs, multiple lectures, things along those lines.
Yeah, so we and that information typically, it depends, right? Like where that information is. It typically is saved in an LMS, so that data needs to come from that in terms of identifying it. I think one of the, say, like good things we have done very early in our development of this platform is to make it agnostic to where the data is coming from. So whether it's an LMS or it's SIS or it's like degree, or no, it doesn't matter where the data is coming from. It all should be accessible in the same view for people to make sense of. So yeah, attendance is something that should come from an LMS. Like we don't reinvent the wheel. You don't take attendance in Stellic, but if you have attendance data, that can then be leveraged in identifying the students who have been missing certain courses in that regard. Does that answer your question, Andy?
Yes, that answers one of the questions. Next question is around the alerts. Are those sent automatically, or is this something you have to manually send?
It's all automated. So you have to you have to figure out like what alert makes sense. We give guidance to institutions what alerts would be useful, but then once they have set up those alerts, like it's all automated. So you can have an alert that says students who are overloading their next semester, and you get an alert when that happens. So yeah, absolutely, those things are completely automated in that regard. I do want to distinguish one important thing. Like there is this whole concept of predictive analytics that somehow you will look at this like last 10 years of data and predict like through some like black box of what happens. Stellic doesn't really believe in those kind of analytics. Again, shared responsibility model. So we work with institutions to figure out for that particular program, for that particular school, what are the indicators that are most relevant, and then we set it up for them, and then after that it all becomes very automated process.
I think that's a good point. I've spent a lot of my career in data science and data analytics, and I think what's very important is that before we start using predictive models, and Stellic does have predictive models around predicting when courses are going to be offered and things like that. Before, we should use the real data that's in front of us. And when you have the high levels of engagement with students telling you what they want to take, let's not try to guess. Let's actually just ask. By ask, I mean ask them to use the platform. So I think that's an interesting differentiator. Another question that's come in is, how does this connect with our SISs, our banners, Ellucian type products? And then how is this comparable to DegreeWorks and some of the forecasting capabilities that DegreeWorks has?
Yeah, so the first piece to like, how does it work with SIS? So we were very fortunate in a sense that like the university I went to, they had a homegrown SIS. So we could not depend on any SIS. And so again, blessing in disguise, now we are able to, I think we are providing, there are 6 different SISs that we integrate with right now. So that whether it's Banner or Colleague or PeopleSoft or Genzabar and all these other systems that are out there. And so what that has done is it has helped us become SIS agnostic in that regard. So yes, we do integrate. We have specifically you're asking about like Banner. We have, I think, quite a few schools who are using Banner as their SIS system. Yeah.
Great.
And what was
the second piece is around DegreeWorks and some of the forecasting capabilities in DegreeWorks.
Yeah. So we have a very different approach. That's why I don't like to call this as a degree audit system, or we call it degree management. From just like the whole approach is like it's student centric and planning centric is the first piece, and the advising piece becomes also relevant. From what I understand about how DegreeWorks works, it's all along the lines of like, here's the need from the registrar perspective. So it just gives you like a very like a tracking centric way, right? So when we talk about our 4-step process, I think DegreeWorks is good in the last step, which is just a tracking of where the student is right now in their thing. From, again, based on my understanding of DegreeWorks and other systems in that particular space, the reporting functionality is very basic. I mean, I think like this is a question that I think person who asks should ask other degree work school. But from what we know, it's not very easy to get any kind of reporting out of it. Like if you want to figure out, like, show me all the students who have not completed this requirement, who are seniors and have had a GPA with less than this much certain amount. I don't think an advisor, in a certain department can just find the information in 10 seconds. And that's a challenge. Maybe an IR office can, but then right, like the whole like multi-step process that needs to go through to get that kind of information. So for everyone to have access to reporting within like seconds of effort, I think that is something very different in the way we are doing. I mean, if at all, like these systems have these kind of reporting enabled at all, so that's how I would answer it. But again, not an Elysian, employee, so I have very little understanding of like how these things work.
Great. Well, Sabih, that wraps up the questions, and I think we're just about coming to time. I wanted to thank you, and more importantly, thank everyone for attending and participating. As I mentioned, feel free to reach out to us if you would like a copy of the recording to share, and we'd obviously be glad to connect with you and have a follow-up conversation. And then best of luck as school sort of settles down or gets underway with some of the quarter schools. And most importantly, good luck planning and for the spring, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Andy.